Last week, I talked a lot about conscience, and the gospel for today picks up that very same message. And so reminding you about that is the first point this morning. Conscience always drives you and me toward perfection. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. A correctly formed conscience never says to you, "How little can I do and still call myself a Catholic?" Conscience does not open the door to be a minimalist. How can I give myself permission to do the minimum? Conscience opens the door to perfection, to the heroic, to the maximum. As I said, we very much need to spread the word about conscience. And today's readings really help us with one detail of how to do that. If we're going to spread the good word about conscience, that means we're going to have to correct others of our brothers and sisters who are Catholic. We're going to have to correct them. And the first reading tells us that that's not easy. It may happen that you have to reprove, that is, correct, your brothers and sisters. If you have to correct them, the first reading says, do not incur sin because of them. In other words, it's a hard thing to correct others because you might incur sin. That's the reason why we have to be delicate and sensitive and careful about correcting others. But that's not why there's so little correction given one to another today. The correction is not given because if I correct them, they may not like me. And if I'm not lovable, who is? They might not like me. Or, God forbid, that I would correct somebody if I live in Madison, because it's so politically incorrect to correct anybody, because no one can be corrected, because there is no good and no bad, and we all know that here. So that's why a lot of people don't do any correcting. They're afraid of not being liked. They're afraid of being politically incorrect, which costs a great deal in our particular environment. But in the first reading, God is telling us the problem with correcting others for true believers, not for people who are afraid of what others think, not for people who are afraid to be politically incorrect, but correcting others is really hard, even for true believers. It may have to be done that you would correct others. If so, do not incur sin because of them. In order to correct another, I got to really purify myself first. In other words, it's very easy for a good person to correct another and at the same time experience a lot of self-satisfaction. I'm correcting you out of love, and at the same time I'm thanking God that I don't need to be corrected in that area. I'm doing great. That's a sin. If I take the occasion of correcting another to enjoy how righteous I am before God, that's a sin. And because of original sin, we get that way. It's hard to correct another without thinking, thank God nobody has to correct me about that. That ruins it. Then, if I correct somebody that way, I incur my own sin. If I don't like somebody, really got to be careful about correcting them. Because if I'm going to correct you, I am really going to put you down at the same time. I hope I'm going to correct you in front of other people so that it's an unmistakable put down. And I can express my negativity about you. Correction of a true believer is not easy to find in the church. That's why there's so much confusion. Because really true believers, really good people, don't correct. And they don't correct because they're afraid of falling into sin in the process of correcting. They're not superficial. Somebody might not like me. I won't be considered politically correct. They're not superficial true believers. But I might sin as I go about correcting the other. And so I have to be very careful about it. And so sometimes, even among true believers, it doesn't get done. The only correction in the diocese that I know of that is done regularly and goes on all the time is when people correct their priest and when priests and people correct the bishop. It seems to be open season for correction on priests and bishops. Not much else gets done. And then the mass media joins in the chorus and makes it even worse. The State Journal finally found something good to say about the church this morning. We offer gluten-free hosts to those who have celiac disease. Well, it's something, I'll take it. But this genuine, heartfelt, faithful correction of others about the right to life, about what marriage really is, about freedom of conscience, has to be done far and wide, especially in the diocese. And I do my best, but you have to be the army that goes out and helps me with this. And so we have to keep in mind today's first reading. We all have to purify ourselves in order to correct another. And the second reading gives us a marvelous thought, a marvelous conviction that will help us to correct another with love and sensitivity rather than for any other motive. We have to think to ourselves that in truth, whether anybody believes it or not, whether anybody knows it or not, because of the salvation won through Christ, everything we need for that salvation belongs to us and to all people. Whether they believe it or not, or whether they know it or not, it belongs to all people. And every one of those people belongs to Christ, and Christ belongs to God. When we approach another, I belong to Christ, you belong to Christ, and we both belong to God. How are we going to treat that person as we offer correction? We have to address the fact that he or she needs correction. We can't run away from it in fear. But we also have to treat them as one who, like ourselves, belongs to Christ, and Christ belongs to God. The mysticism of seeing the other person through the eyes of Christ. Whether anybody believes it or not, whether anybody knows it or not, they belong to Christ. Christ belongs to God. And it's from there that we enter into the dynamic of fraternal correction so needed in today's church. Praise be Jesus Christ.